So one thing in the opening I wanted to just, that I didn't share with you, that I'd like to share with you now is our focus for the 64 Ways for 64 Days, the season for peace and nonviolence that we're in. And today's focus is, today I will treat the children I encounter with respect and care, knowing that I serve as a model to them. Yeah, beautiful. Well, on their 50th wedding anniversary, couple summed up the reason for their long and happy marriage. Sounds a little bit like the joke from last week, but it's a theme. The husband said, "I have tried never to be selfish. After all, there is no I in the word marriage." And the wife said, "For my part, I have never corrected my husband's spelling." One more. A man walked into a store to return a pair of eyeglasses that he had purchased for his wife a week before. The store manager asked, "What seems to be the problem, sir?" The man replied, "I'm returning these glasses I bought for my wife. She's still not seeing things my way." Oh, dear. Welcome back, Michelle Shea. Let's get Michelle Shea. Michelle has been in Greece working with immigrants. We're so glad to have you back, safe and sound. Well, here we are, still in the midst of our focus on Brené Brown's Braving the Wilderness. And I just want to honor that you're hanging in there, because what I realize and know is that this is not light-hearted material. It's really not. And it's, to me, it feels very relevant, and it feels like something that we get to talk about. Right? Are we with me? All right. Okay, kind of. Okay, good. All right. So last week we talked about, actually, last week was Raymond Anderson. Wasn't that fun? Yeah. So what we are exploring in this message series is what it really means to be free. If you recall the quote by Maya Angelou that is so beautiful, she says, "You're only free when you realize you belong no place, you belong every place. No place at all. The price is high. The reward is great." The price is high, the reward is great. And on Wednesday nights, we've really been delving into what it really means to belong. What does it really mean to belong? And what does it really mean to be free in that belonging? You know, Brené talks a lot in this book about loneliness. You know, our world has never been smaller. You know, it's not unusual on Facebook to communicate with someone from Sweden or France or Africa, you know, all over the world. Yet, from 1980 to now, the stats of loneliness have doubled. In 1980, 20% of Americans reported feeling lonely. And today it's more like 40%. Even with all the ways that we have now to connect. And so Brené starts talking about in this book what's going on here. And she talks about something called sorting. That we have sorted ourselves into factions based on ideologies and politics. And we've turned away from each other in blame and shame and anger because we're so afraid. And she says that our world is in a spiritual collective crisis because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And did you know that at a DNA level, we are hardwired to connect. We are hardwired to belong. That our neural, hormonal, and genetic makeup supports interdependence over independence. That we gain strength from our ability to communicate, work, and play together. Yet we're more isolated than ever. How can that be? Brené talks about at the very source of this disconnection is fear. It's fear. Our fear of vulnerability, our fear of getting hurt, of being alone, our fear of being criticized and made wrong. We're afraid of conflict and not being good enough. And I thought this was fascinating, what she talked about with terrorism. That terrorism, yes, is meant to hurt people immediately, but it's also what its pure purpose is to be divisive, is to generate fear. It's a process of generating fear, of allowing fear to disconnect us and make us fearful of each other, because what happens as a result of terrorism is that we create an other to be afraid of. We create language and images of this enemy that locks it into our minds and hearts, and it hardens our hearts, and it closes our minds and our hearts to possibility. We tend to go deep into self-protection and isolation, divide and conquer. I mean, how many of us have had second thoughts about going to a large gathering because we're afraid? I remember, the 4th of July, going downtown D.C., and I heard some people say, gosh, I'm just kind of hesitant to go in case something happens. So, fear. The thing is, what do we do in the midst of that? And so what Brene talks about is that we get to reclaim our authenticity and our connection. We have to reclaim belonging. Because she said people are hard to hate close up. We got to move in. We got to move in. And she suggests to do this to replace hate with pain. And so she gave some examples of this, but what came to my heart was the recent Parkland shooting. And we can say that this 19-year-old young man was filled with hate. And so what Brene would suggest is, what if we could substitute that he was filled with hate? We substitute that word. He was filled with pain. He was filled with pain. The white supremacists that marched in Charlottesville, that in appearances scream and yell and show up in hatred. What Brene suggests is that let's go deeper and let's replace that with they were filled and were expressing deep pain. So what it does and what she's calling us to do is to rehumanize. See, what happens is, while we're so isolated from each other, is that we've dehumanized each other. Yes, when we create an other, that person is no longer a person. It's kind of a thing, an object. And she talks about this concept called moral exclusion, that in the realm of dehumanization, what we have done as a culture and society is created certain groups that no longer fit our moral code of conduct, because they're all of a sudden less than human. And then we don't treat them well. So, okay, this is our human condition. Now what is ours to do? And so she gives us some tools in this book. And one of the main tools that she gives us is very simple, and we hear it in other teachings. It's just called listening. It's called listening. What if we could listen to each other? Because being self-righteous and dug in, folks, not caring about others blinds us to our own. Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. But I have to say, and this was True Confessions, we're getting pretty deep on Wednesday nights. And the one thing is, we're good people, and we can talk about rehumanizing our world, and we can talk about substituting the word hate with pain. But what we have to also acknowledge is when we really just don't feel like it. There are just some days when I know for myself, and I shared with the group, that I can just sit down and have a good old cry. Yeah. That's some of the things that people say about people that are so untrue. And it's just because they haven't had an experience of love with another person that's different than them. And it can hurt my heart. And I know it hurts all of our hearts because I know all of you hold love and connection and see beyond any perceived differences. And so it's just being honest and gentle with ourselves, folks, as we navigate the world right now when we don't feel like being respectful. Or we get on Facebook and we say something in response to a comment that just riles us up. And then we click the little up arrow and we go, oh God, why did I do that? Because then what we notice, you notice what it stirs? It stirs the pot of separateness. And what we know, and I know I've said this a zillion times, is that we can never come together, we never heal separateness from the same energy. It just sparks it. We have to be that bridge. So, addressing it with love and pain, because she also points out, wow, the energy that we spend meeting that energy of separation with more separation, folks, it takes so much more energy to meet it with separation than it does with love and compassion. Because remember, we're hardwired. We are hardwired for love and compassion. Regardless of whether you feel it or not, that is your DNA. You are hardwired to connect. You are hardwired to belong. So, there was a story that I did want to share with you from the book about how we transform our anger, because a lot of the response to what's happening, people have shared with me, I just feel so angry. And how do I work with that? And there was a man in the book named Antoine Lioris. His wife, Helene, was killed by terrorists at the Bataclan Theater in Paris, along with 88 other people. And 2 days after the attack, he wrote an open letter to his wife's killers on Facebook. And I'm just going to give you the gist of it. He said, "You stole the life of an exceptional human being, the love of my life, the mother of my son, but you will not have my hate. In other words, your actions will not make me hate you. I won't do it, and neither will my son, because we pay such a price for holding hatred in our heart." So, we have to learn to listen and to be willing to get to what's underlying. Because there is, as she says, that pain underneath that hate. And there's a verse from Proverbs that says, "Let the wise hear and gain in learning, and those that understand acquire skill." See, as we listen, we learn, we understand, and we become skillful in taking action and connection. Yeah, but the tricky part about listening is that we've got to be willing to hear opinions that don't match our own, that might even hurt our feelings. But we never have to take abuse. We create healthy boundaries. But the one thing that Brene says is that we've got to be willing to reach across a perceived aisle and listen and actually say the words, "Tell me more." Now, I don't know about you. Sometimes I get an earful in the first 30 seconds. Right? And that's just honest. If it's something that, if it's an opinion that just feels very, I don't understand. But the thing I have to realize is they don't understand me either. And as clear as we think we might be and as right as we think we might be, what if we could sit across from each other and say, "Tell me more"? That is just one simple step and how we can rehumanize the conversations that are happening in our world. Because I care enough about you to know what's on your heart. And you care enough about me to know what's on mine. So, how are you doing? Yeah, this is not the easiest road, folks. But if you would like to hear Brene did an amazing interview with Oprah Winfrey on her show online called Living Brave. And she asked Oprah some very vulnerable questions. And what was so beautiful was Oprah's willingness to just be vulnerable and to share from her heart. See, that's what it's going to take, folks. Us being willing to be vulnerable and share from our heart, our truth. Rehumanizing experience, or experiment. Let's do that. So this week, when you're out in your life and you hear something that jolts you, I invite you just to inner reflect. Is this really about hate or is it about pain? And what is one thing I can do to rehumanize it? Just one thing from the love and compassion in my heart. And I'm going to ask you to do that with yourself. Because, folks, I think we can forget ourselves in this whole equation. Where can you be more gentle and more loving with yourself? Where can you give yourself love and compassion? So are you ready? You know, we're out there and we're being warriors of love. We're going to go out of here and we're going to zap some people with some love and compassion. How's that? Okay. All right. Thank you for saying yes. Folks, we're making a difference. We really are. And thank you for being in this conversation with us. I know it's not the easiest, but it feels like it's really important. So let's affirm together. I transform fear into courage and focus on what matters. I generate love, compassion, and connection within myself and within others. Yes, you do. And so it is. Amen.